Would you climb a fence to meet AJ Foyt? This week's guest did just that. I have Jon Krolewicz on from the SCCA, and we talk about Jon's motorsports background. And this guy has raced everything, including a prototype at the Rolex 24. Let's throw the green flag on this episode. Well, Jon, it's great to have you on the Late to Grid podcast. You're well known in the SCCA world. You're well known in the motorsports community. So it's going to be great to hear your motorsports journey and some of the things that you have to share about our sport.
It's great to be here, and I'm excited about a chance to share and talk and maybe get more well known. I don't know if that's always good, but we'll see, right?
We'll make you famous to a couple people at least. Well, I want to start with what sparked your motorsports interest, and it was a book report, I think in the third grade, about the Indy 500. What about that book report got you interested?
I'd always been interested in cars. My first word was actually car, and so my mom in particular would buy me on every birthday. She'd buy a race car with my whatever age was, that was the number she would go find. And come third grade, it was, time for one of those first book reports that you do. And I remember picking up that book and reading that book. And the first chapter was IndyCar and the Indy 500. And the second chapter, I think, was NASCAR and then sports car racing and Formula One. It was just all of these varieties of cars. So here was me that knew what a race car was. And all of a sudden, this door opened and I went, wow, there's an entire world out there. And in particular, the Indy 500 being the first chapter, that was the thing that got my attention the most. I wish I had that book report. I wish I had that book. I've looked a number of times. But later that year, we found out that you could get general admission for the Indy 500, that you didn't have to have tickets handed down by generation like the stories would go. And so my dad and I drove up in a little red Dodge Colt, camped in the car the night before, went into the infield, talked our way into the back of somebody's pickup truck, and I watched an Indy 500. I watched that start. It's a super vivid memory for me. I watched Danny Sullivan spin. I watched Danny Sullivan go on to win. And, it was this, from that book report on, it was just this world that just kept opening up with all these varieties, all of these different cars, all of these different facets that has continued to hold my interest.
That's awesome. Camping in a Colt. Tight quarters.
Yeah. Yep. Camping outside. Camping outside. We parked randomly on a street that was there in the town of Speedway, Indiana. And since then, the people that we ended up camping in front of their yard, we made lifelong friends with them. We've attended weddings, and I text them daily. It's been kind of an incredible journey of what started with hey, there's a parking spot. Let's go park in it for the next day.
That's a big part of our sport too. Is just making the connections, the relationships. Everyone's so welcoming. And do you still park in front of their house for the event?
We do. Now I'll either stay inside or a lot of times we'll set up a tent and camp in the backyard because there's all kinds of friends and all kinds of people. And in particular with that, we talk about inside the SCCA, come for the cars and stay for the people. The reality in a situation like that, or even in Speedway, Indiana, you're kind of coming for the people and staying for the people. And so it's, everybody there has been so welcoming. And I think that was my first introduction to the social side of motorsports. Yes, the cars are awesome. Yes, the racing is awesome. But yes, the people that you meet, the people that you get to associate with are also really, really cool.
They are. And there's 300,000 of them at the end of May.
And at the Indy 500, and then, another, 70,000 SCCA members and, however many, all of the series and places that I've run with over the years, whether it's NASA or Porsche Club or anything, right? It just, that circle of friends just keeps expanding.
Yeah. So I'm going to share a personal experience real quickly. I'm just back from Solo Nationals, my very first ever Solo Nationals. I was there in a support role. Yeah, thanks. Did not compete. But when you talk about the people, it opened our eyes about autocross. I grew up autocrossing in high school, SCCA autocrossing and solo events. And to get back and get that close to an event, that many people, the parties, the camaraderie, the help. It's amazing. So you're right. It does come down to the people.
And I've been to, I don't know, 21 or 22 solo nationals now. Missed this year because I was on vacation and out of the country. And when I came back and I heard the stories, coworkers and how they did, and friends and how they did, I realized that I didn't necessarily miss the driving aspect of it. I could kind of replace that with an autocross coming up or a race
Mhm.
coming up. But I certainly missed sharing those experiences that my friends got to have. And so I'm super glad to hear that you went and kind of saw that, because that event is just as special as any other pro event that we would talk about in terms of what it's like to be there, what it's like to experience it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Club Spec Mustang in my future.
I drove the Club Spec Miata last year. The SCCA owns one, and so it was like, "Hey, John, go drive it." I did okay on it. There's a big trophy over on the shelf across from
Nice.
me. Um, but both those classes are so cool, and especially as the world moves faster and jobs take attention, having something where like this is the formula, and yet it can still go be like, hey, I can go to work every day in this, I can go pick up groceries in this. I think those classes are excellent, so I'm glad to hear that
Yes.
it sparked your interest and has your attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's steer back to your motorsports journey. So you did the book report, you went to an Indy 500, you got the bug. When did you realize you wanted to get behind the wheel and get on track?
Oh man, I we used to keep this. My mom used to keep these books for us. They were like children's books, like here's the first lock of hair and those kind of things, like taped into it, almost like a scrapbooking thing. And I can read every year what I wanted to be when I grow up. And marine biology was and still a huge part and passion of my life. And so every year from kindergarten on up, it was marine biologist. And then in the third grade, I guess right around my birthday, which would have been after the book report, before the Indy 500, I wrote down, and maybe a race car driver. And that stayed there for a few years and started going to more races, which is a crazy story in and of itself, because we went to the Indy 500, and I guess 6 weeks later, we went to the Firecracker 400 down in Daytona. And both those we did as like drive, or the Daytona, drive into the infield, stand on the roof of the car. We did the IndyCar race at Pocono in August of that same year, in August of '85, and I got to meet AJ Foyt.
Mm.
And when I say got to meet him, what I mean is I absolutely jumped a fence, snuck into the pits, and walked up to a very angry AJ Foyt and asked him for his autograph. And 2 weeks later, after that, my dad said, "Man, this is my childhood hero," and my kid just like was brave enough to go jump over a fence and go meet him. I've got to do it, and I don't think I can jump over a fence to go do it. So my dad, who's a teacher, um, English teacher at the time, he knew some folks with a couple of local newspapers, and he said, "Hey, what's the deal with credentials?" And one of those newspaper editors said, "Oh man, we're always looking for somebody to like bring us back pictures or tell stories that's not just pulled off the AP wire." And so my dad went to his first race credentialed was the 1985 Southern 500, which of course is the one that, if you follow motorsports and particularly NASCAR, that was when Bill Elliott became Million Dollar Bill. And so
Mm.
the media was huge around it. And I I got to meet AJ in a much calmer environment that weekend. Um, Still did some sneaking in to Victory Lane. I don't know how much of those stories I should tell. Um, But we started regularly going to NASCAR and IndyCar races with credentials. And so the drivers that I knew, I went from, I know what a race car is, to here's how racing, here's the big world of racing. And immediately the drivers that I meet are AJ Foyt and Richard Petty. And, I mean, I remember that weekend at Darlington, Kyle Petty came over, Richard came over and said, "Hey, do you want a drink?" and handed me a Pepsi through a fence. And like 10 minutes later, Kyle Petty comes over and goes, "Hey, do you want a drink?" And it's like, your dad already got us
Wow.
one. And so the people I was meeting, I met David Pearson that weekend, and later on I would, meet and get to talk to Tim Richmond over and over. And so there was this number of years where the race car driving that I knew and the race car drivers that I met were still people that are larger than life. And so there was a lot of, I'll never be able to do that.
Mm.
Um, and so it was this like this dream that I could never compare myself to these giants. And then um, we got invited to a test session at Indianapolis when AJ, after he hurt his legs at Elkhart Lake in 1990, we went to when he climbed back in the race car. We were there. We were like guests. We were in the pits and all of that. And I remember being in the garage area, and there were three other drivers testing that weekend, and one of them walked around the corner, and it was John Andretti. And here's me at like whatever I was, at that time, 5'5", 5'4". I think I was 14 years old. Um, and John Andretti walks around the corner, and all of a sudden, it's not, AJ Foyt or Richard Petty that's like super tall. All of a sudden, it's a person that's like my size, and like I could kind of draw the congruence there. And I just standing in that garage area, I remember going, wait a minute, if he can do this, I can do this. And
Mm.
and so that was the first time that I was like, okay, how do I actually what do I need to do to actually get started with this? And that started the journey of okay, I'm going to save up. I'm going to buy a racing go-kart. I'm going to go racing. I'm going to, whatever this takes. And, so that's where it went from I'm a fan to okay, what is there a career here?
That's really cool. Did you end up going go-karting?
Did saved up, worked jobs with my uncle, did a lot of drywall stuff, did some plumbing with another uncle, um, kept all the money in an old like VHS movie case, saved up, bought a go-kart, bought an old trailer, bought a trailer hitch for my dad's Nissan Stanza. Like it was a total like what can I do? I think the total investment, like helmet, cart, motor, everything was like $1,800 or $1,700 or something like that. And it was every penny I'd basically ever made at that point. Um, but I could now go tow to a racetrack and sit in a racing vehicle and go drive it.
Oh man, I love that story. What track did you race at?
It's a track that's actually pretty local to me. It was called Palmetto Super Track. So South Carolina being South Carolina, it's like a 1/8 mile oval.
Mm.
So pretty short. Asphalt, which was cool. Most of the ones were dirt. That was the first time in there, and I remember getting in that cart, and I absolutely boiled the brake fluid out of the little reservoir because I was scared, absolutely like shitless.
Wow. And your parents must have been supportive.
Yeah, as they've always been we're supportive of what you like and what you like to do. Um, Having school teachers as parents, there wasn't funding necessarily, but yeah, my dad, gosh, I think it was probably 12 years or 13 years before I went to a race that my dad wasn't at as as crew in some capacity.
Hmm.
So yeah, so supportive of what I wanted to do and helpful of that, which is I mean it's imperative, especially with motorsports.
What did you learn in karting that you applied later in either racing or even business life?
I think that, the first thing you learn in motorsports, we like to talk about, apexes and cornering and all of that. But I think the first thing you learn is budgeting and organization. And so I remember like going to the cart tracks and like, well, I can't afford a cart stand. So I had a couple of old milk crates and that was my cart stand. And so you immediately learn like what you can do, how to make things happen kind of no matter what. And that's still something that I apply, and I talk to people like about this a lot. I go, don't the answer is not no, the answer is how.
Mm.
And so that's the big thing that I learned. One of the things that I learned, some of my stuff has been really, really blessed. I talked about scaring the absolute crap out of myself that first day, and I was pretty distraught. And a month later, the first race was like in April, and so a month later, so I'm at the Indy 500, and I'm talking to Jim Crawford, who we'd gotten to know some. So Jim had driven Formula One, and now he was doing Indy cars, and I kind of confessed to him almost priest-like, like, man, I was scared. I don't think I can do this. And I remember Jim looked at me and said, if you weren't scared, I'd be more worried than if you are scared. All of us are
Mm.
scared when we get in that car, when we push that limits, and when we go to the end, and that's okay. And what you're going to learn is how to either harness or handle or aim that fear. And so, that's still something I remember where it's like, all right, it's okay to be nervous sometimes. It's okay to be scared just because we're not going to show it on the outside and we're going to be really tough. There's a lot of emotions that you have to understand and accept and handle when you're in the car. And so whether it's the budgeting or the organization or that sort of emotional mental approach, those are two things that I definitely carry with me all the time.
Yeah. I'm thinking back to the book where your mom kept all the memories.
Yep.
And maybe she didn't keep it into high school, but was there a time when marine biologist wasn't even part of the what I want to do and it was just race car driver?
Yeah, I would say there was kind of a weekend. Um, I used to go to SeaWorld all the time. Like we live like 400 or 500 miles away. We would drive down there. I mean, 10 weekends a year, because
Hmm.
it was the place that I could go to, to experience sea life in a way that I couldn't. I can't go to Washington. I can't, go to all these places that I would need to see all of those animals. And I went down in 1991, and I realized that we were going down on 24-hour Daytona weekend. And all day I was sitting there at SeaWorld going, I don't think I want to be here tomorrow. I think I want to go to the 24 Hours of Daytona. And I'd been a couple of times. And so that night, my dad had, driven down with me. And I looked at him and I said, hey, when the fair closes, I want to drive over to Daytona. And he goes, what, you want to come back here tomorrow? And I went, no, I want to just do that. So we drove over to Daytona and, bought the general admission ticket and went in. And I remember that being a very strong moment of, no, this is what I want to do in a different way than the marine biology. And so it was, the book wasn't being kept, but if there was a moment where it
Yeah.
disappeared, it was that weekend.
Wow. That's yeah, I'm impressed that, 10 weekends a year going down to SeaWorld, kind of keep connected to one of your interests and passions and then being able to pivot and head over to Daytona and the rest is history, as they say.
I didn't. I think I've been to SeaWorld twice since then.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that
And-
was 1991. So yeah.
yeah. So, go-karting, when did you move into cars?
Um, I'd probably been karting a couple of years, and I'd gotten in with the local SCCA region. The regional executive, and a couple of other folks had race cars, and I knew, in the looking forward of I want to go do more racing stuff. I knew that I needed to be involved in racing stuff, and I'd been crewing, go karting and then crewing for them. And basically, as soon as I had the driver's license and could get a car, I bought a Honda CRX and I started autocrossing. And so there were weekends for a while where Saturday was go kart day, and I'd get back from the go kart race and immediately just climb into the CRX. There were some nights because those races would go into the night where we might finish at 12:30 or 1 a.m., come back home, climb in the CRX, and drive to an autocross in Florida or Tennessee or North Carolina or something like that. And so for a while, it was twice a weekend. Autocrossing taught me how to work on cars versus go karts, and I started saving up money. Um, had some money that my great grandmother had put away for me for college. I used some of that to excuse me, to buy an old U-Haul box truck, and found a Formula Ford for $5,500. And this is in 1997. And so all of a sudden now I was like, okay, I have a road racing operation, and it's time to go to driver school.
Why open wheel?
It's the Indy 500.
All right.
There
Makes
was
sense.
there was not really in my mind. Like at one point, I was like, I should get a CRX, and I should maybe go improve touring racing or something like that. And to build one of those was gonna be, at that point, $4,500 to $6,000. And so when the open wheel car came up for the same price, there was not another question in my mind.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how long did you race the Formula Ford?
Do we count the one that's sitting in my garage and say that it hasn't ever ended? I
Sure.
I raced that one through 2001, really. So 4 or 5 years in that. Did a couple of one-offs in like the Chuck Cecil, the RE that I mentioned. He had a Formula Continental, and so I got to drive it. There was another guy with an Atlantic. I got to kind of play with it, and that was the point where I was in this. I've I've built the skills that I can go talk to a pro team, and the pro team will listen to me. Um, but I need the money. What am I going to do? How am I going to do that? And so I got the first stint in Formula Ford was really 97 to 2001.
And then were you doing any other? But actually, let me ask this: while you're doing all this, what are you doing for a career? How are you making money?
I heard a musician uh, that was trying to break into, like I'm trying to get a recording contract and all that once, and she had a job waitressing, and she called it her toy job. This is my toy job. I waitress
Hmm.
to put food on my table so I can go actually do my career. So I always viewed my career as racing. What I was doing to earn money to go race at that point was working for a Firestone Auto Care Center. So for as many hours as I could afford to show up per week between high school and trying to do college the first time, um, was was spent really cleaning floors and doing oil changes and stocking the back room and helping mechanics out and those kind of things. So that was my toy job.
I gotcha. So karts, autocross, the CRX, Formula Ford, dabbling in some Continentals and Formula Atlantics. Then what?
So one day got a phone call from somebody in Charleston, South Carolina, a guy named Steve Bryant, and he said, "Hey John, I'm told that you know CRXs." And I said, "I'm pretty good at it." And he goes, "Okay, I'm trying to build an SCCA e-production car, and my mechanic quit. And can you come down this weekend and just point at the stuff that needs to stay on the car or needs to go away?" And he said, "I'll pay you some, a couple $100 or something like that." And I'm like, "Couple $100 to go stand in a shop for Saturday and point at some stuff? I'll do that." Um, and I get down there, and this CRX, all of the parts have been thrown into a refrigerator box.
Oh,
And basically, Steve, since he had not taken it apart, he didn't know any of that. And he said, "Okay, what can you tell me?" And I'm like, "Well, let me like noodle this." He says, "I got to go to a business meeting. I'll be back." And by the time he came back, I had the wiring harness laid out and all the parts. I basically built sort of a blow up CRX. And that led to helping him build the car. And then one day he goes, "What I need is somebody with a national license to drive this. I want to go to the runoffs." And I went, "I have one of
um,
those." And and he said, "No, no, not like national autocrossing." I said, "No, no, I have a national SCCA license. I'm road racing a Formula Ford." And he said, "Huh." And so we went and did a test. There were three of us. I was not the slowest. I was like, it was fun. It was the first time I like got in a car that like wasn't mine on a racetrack, and I was way faster. And
mm,
so he said, "Okay, looks like I found my national driving." And that turned into another job. So I left the Firestone, worked the front counter of what amounted to a tuner shop, right? We sold a lot of clear corners and body kits, and the race car sat there, and it was sort of our look, we do this too. And I did that for a year. And as part of that, we had what I'll call a technical partnership with a team in Charleston called named Autometrics. They're a Porsche shop. And I got to know Gordon Friedman, who owned that. Autometrics had a car that was going to Daytona for the 24, and Gordon said, "If you've got sponsorship money, we've got a seat for you."
whoa.
And I came up with the sponsorship money about 3 weeks after four other people had also come up with sponsorship money. So now all of a sudden I had sponsorship money and no seat.
Mm,
And I went, "Well, I guess I need to call another team because I kind of have, I have this insurance company that's willing to invest some money in me as a race car driver." And I contacted a team, CZO Florida Racing, with a P1. And at that point, I was like, man, I don't know that I'm ready for this. And the owners down there, they were like, the very fact that you'll look at us and say you don't know if you're ready is better than all the people that are like, I have money, let me drive your car.
Oh,
And so we went to a test. I did pretty well at that test. I wasn't the fastest, but I wasn't far from the top, but I was the only one without prototype experience. And they looked at me and they said, "Okay, you're going to Daytona." And so all of a sudden I had a seat in a P1 car at the 24 Hours of Daytona. And at that point it was like, it felt like the roller coaster, tick, 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 tick. And then all of a sudden, like, well, it's going now. And then,
yeah.
if you ask me about, going to Daytona is crazy because if you ask me about the 1991 24 Hours of Daytona or the 1987 or any of the ones that I'd spectated or flagged at or any of that, I can tell you all of the cars and all the battles and who took the lead at what hour. And when I went to drive, when I drove it, I can't tell you about anything but like what I was doing and what we were doing. And I remember at one point getting out of the car after a stint, and my dad going like, "And you were like up there, and you and Tony Stewart were like working traffic for a little while," and I'm like, "I have no idea. I don't know what car Tony's in. I don't know. Like, I'm just, you're in that." Um, the only person I remember knowing that was on the track with me is I gave Paul Newman a little love tap in the back in the International Horseshoe, and I went over to apologize, and it was cool because he's like, "I don't know what the people in front of us were doing." He goes, "You're good. It's all good." Yeah, I'm like, "Yeah, I just, the accordion effect, I got him a little bit." But that's it was, crazy whirlwind. And at that point, all of a sudden, I'm like, "Oh, he's a pro driver now," and
Yeah.
that was a weird situation to be in.
So you said yes when opportunities came up and you figured it out and it helped you along your motorsports journey. Let's go back to the Porsche when they said, if you get money, there's a ride for you. Were you prepared for that? And if not, what advice would you have for somebody to be ready for something like that?
Man, I mean, at the time, I would absolutely look at you and say I was prepared for that. Once I did some of the pro stuff and then I went and I started driving time attack cars and like really like 800 horsepower Evos and all of that. And when I compare how comfortable I was once I was in those cars all the time to how comfortable I was before I got in them, I mean, it's a money thing, but you just need to get seat time and fast stuff to feel comfortable to be ready for some of those opportunities. And I hadn't had I'd done, a weekend in a Formula Continental, I'd done some stuff in a Formula Atlantic, but I hadn't gotten to really go through a lot of rhythm of that. And look, I don't know how I would have done it. I didn't have any money. I had friends that were like, "Oh man, why don't you just get your dad to buy you a pro weekend? It's only $25,000." And so there was nothing for me to do but say yes and then go get baptized in that fire. But looking back on it, I recognize that, the 2006 John that had been, driving these 180 mile an hour cars for a while would have been much better prepared than the 2002 John was. And I don't know how to fix that without money, but that's, there were times that I look back and went, man, I wish this John was in that car at that test day. And so
Yeah. So what are you driving now? Do you get a chance to compete on track or does your role with the SCCA slow that down?
my role with the SCCA absolutely slows it down. It is I don't want to call it a curse, right? Because there's so much different opportunities to help people drive race cars. And when I get to
Mhm.
help people drive race cars, it is rewarding in a totally different way. But there's two factors in working for a sanctioning body. One is you're working at the events instead of being able to drive them when you go. And two, when you're immersed in it on a day-to-day basis. Like right now, my cell phone is ringing and it's a region leader in California, and I'm gonna talk to them for a while, which is great. Um, but in a couple of weeks there's an autocross, and I'm like, do I want to go to the autocross? And right now I do, but depending on how the week goes, am I going to want to go stand out and do an autocross and be around that, or am I going to want to sit at home or go to the lake or go to the air show that's about the same distance away? There's other things. So, what original question? What am I driving now? I own a Swift DB3 that has been converted to Formula Ford. It sits in my garage. I've driven it in the runoffs twice. I haven't had the time to really get it out and campaign it the way I'd like to. I've been lucky enough that I've been invited in to a couple of seats. Lee Hill, who is a former chairman of the board of the SCCA, has a spec racer Ford, and now 2 years in a row, he's invited me in to drive an enduro weekend, co-drive with him in his spec racer Ford Gen 3. And so I've been super blessed to have some like, hey, come do this. One of the other current board of directors members is a really good friend of mine. He's got a Formula Ford that he runs in C modified and autocross, and so I will share that with him sometimes. But I don't have a concentrated effort of my own to go race at this point, and this is the one place you'll see me stumble on storytelling because it's you know it if there's something that I'm not happy about, it's probably that. I still want to go race. I still want to go out there. I still want to work towards a season. I want to, whether it's the runoffs or a divisional championship or solo nationals. I want win, lose or draw. I want to be back in a season that I get to put effort towards and really fight for.
Yeah, because there was a time in your life when you would be doing 100+ events, track
You,
days, coaching, instruction, racing, right?
yeah, I mean it's when I did autocrossing and then I got the Formula Ford, I stopped autocrossing, right? Because that was the thing you did. All right, you did autocrossing, now you're going road racing. And I had an incident and tore a bunch of the bodywork off, the Formula Ford, and it needed repair. And so while I was repairing that, very much I needed my fix. And I went, man, I'm gonna take the CRX out and I'm gonna go autocross. And I'm not gonna not race. I'm gonna go do something. And so autocrossed 4 or 5 times in between these race weekends that I did. And when I got to my next race weekend, I noticed how much more comfortable I was just being in the car. And I went, oh, that's the autocrossing. That's that I'm going through this motion. And so I immediately just went, I'm going to keep autocrossing too. It wasn't like a national full press effort all the time, and a lot of time it was on street tires before street tires were a thing. But yeah, it got to where I would, I might have been road racing 10 to 12 weekends a year. I might have been doing another five to 10 time attack events, one lap of America. And then if I wasn't doing one of those primary things, I was going to go to the closest autocross. And so, yeah, I used to count it in days. And so I'd be like, man, I raced, 100 days a year, 100 days is not, I guess I raced like 68 or 69 days during the year, and just dozens of events. And it was, you know, I was instructing at track days at that point. So yeah, it was, I would not go, 5 or 6 days without being in a car going fast.
Yeah. What advice would you have for someone that's doing what you were doing? How and what by advice? How can they get better with seat time? Because I always say seat time is important, but seat time with coaching is even better. What advice would you give someone to make the most of seat time?
I mean, I think that that's tough, right? Because coaching is, you know, can you afford a coach? What is coaching, right? So first, let's define coaching with, making sure you have the best data you can. And look, if your best data is a stopwatch and a video camera, that's that. If your data is real data acquisition systems, that's that. If your best data, in my case, a lot of times was just my dad standing outside the car and watching.
Hmm.
Before we had data, we'd like look at a race course, whether it's a road course or an autocross course, and we'd pick segments basically, and we'd divide it up. And he would sit there and time not just me, but other drivers. And so he could come to me and go, man, in this section, from turn 3 to turn 8, you're 1/10 faster than the pole sitter. But man, you're getting hammered by 3/10 in turn 1. And so it it's always look for ways to collect data however you can, and then analyze it with a fine tooth comb, with as fine a tooth comb as you can get. You have to be real with yourself. You can never say like, oh man, well he's just going faster than me because it's a faster car. You have to say like, I don't care if it's a faster car. I've got to figure out a way to go faster. And so for me, that was my approach to how do I make the most of the time that I'm in the cars.
So you want to get into a regular season. Where does that start? What do you have to do to make that happen?
A budget.
A
You
budget.
need money, right? I mean, even now, like the Formula Ford's in the garage. It's got a Honda motor, but I'm still gonna call it Formula Ford because I'm old. Uh, I know that I could sit down and if I, let's say like, okay, I want to go to the runoffs next year in this car. I know that I'm going to need at least probably, 3 weekends to qualify. I'm going to need the entry fees. I'm going to need that. I'm going to need to sit down. And if I sat down and did it, I go, all right, bare minimum, if I'm eating the hamburgers I cook on the grill at the racetrack and staying in the tent and all that, it's it's about 11 or 12 thousand dollars. That's owning the car, owning the truck, owning the trailer, all of that. That's what
Hmm.
it's going to need. And so the budget is first. The equipment is second. If I didn't have anything, I'd be like, well, I need a car, right? And maybe it's renting a car, maybe it's buying a car, but it still always comes down to do I have how much money is it going to take and how do I allocate these funds across the course of a year?
Gotcha.
Well,
Well,
and maybe you were looking for a more,
no,
emotional interest, like you have to have the drive to want it to happen, and maybe,
no,
but
I love that response because it's honest, and the listener is going to understand if they want to put together a season. That's the place you got to start. Do you have the cash to do it? And if you don't, actually, if you don't, this kind of parlays into some advice you wish you would have received earlier in your career about sponsorships and going for the ask. Can you think of a time when, and you don't have to get the specifics, but think of a time when you were talking to someone about some money and you could have asked for more, but you were thinking with your wallet, not theirs?
oh man, I had an offer, after I did the 24 hours, more teams were like, oh, you drove it, you did well, there's good recommendations here. Um, come drive our car. And in pro racing, other than, what, maybe 2 dozen teams in this country, what they mean is we want you to bring us money to drive the car. Just how it is. And so I had an offer for, one of four drivers in a Daytona prototype at the 24 Hours of Daytona. And I think the offer at the time was like 60 grand. And in my head, I was like, man, that's a lot of money to ask for. And I got in, pitched at the time, Fortune 500 company, which was like a stupid good like chance. And they seemed enthusiastic. And, I always tell people like the worst answer is not no, the worst answer is maybe. And so I kind of got this maybe, and let's get back to you. And then they came back and they said, "Hey, answer's no," and I went, "Okay." And then I showed up at the 24 Hours of Daytona, and they are full sponsor on a car.
Oh,
And so I reached back out and I went, "Hey, what's the deal?" And they went, "Well, we were doing the research as they should, and we found that we could sponsor a whole car for the season for 1.6 million."
huh.
And I went, "Oh my God, what if I had asked for 1.6 million?" And they said, "Oh, we'd have said yes."
Unbelievable.
And, would they have said yes? Would it have been easy for them to tell me? I mean, it felt genuine, but at the time I was like, man, my head could not wrap myself around little old me walking into a Fortune 500 company and going, hey, you know, I need $1.6 million. Just was not in my head. And yet,
No.
if I'd had it there, like I might have had a full season in a Daytona prototype. So, phew, that's a that's the big one that for me that just I was like, man, would I have done?
Yeah. Who
Would
would
I
have
would I
thought?
have asked for that? And so from then on in, any deck I made, like if it if the stars were going to be in it. So yeah,
Absolutely. If you don't want to do one race, you can do the whole season, every pitch deck.
yeah. And I just couldn't imagine. Like even now, I think about where I was at, I was like 20, I was 26 or 27 at that point, but plenty old enough to know better. And it just was such a big number to me. I mean, at that point in my toy job, I'm making like $11,000 a year. Like when I drove the prototype that first time, I had a guy ask me, he goes, how did like, man, you did it. Like, you're my hero. How did you do it? And I said, well, every bit of my money went into, like the sponsor money was the sponsor money, but I still needed like a better helmet, and I needed like other stuff, and I needed to get there. And I was renting a house with a buddy of mine, and I moved out of that house and moved back home at 26 years old. I moved back into my childhood bedroom so that I could go drive this prototype at Daytona. And he looked at me and went, "You moved back in with your parents to do it." And I'm like, "That's I had to. It was that or the street." And he went, "Oh man, I don't think I can ever do it." And I went,
Hmm.
okay. Um, so yeah, for at that point, I'd still like when I think back to that, I think back and my brain could not conceive of walking into a room and asking somebody for 1.6 million.
Right. But it happened to somebody.
Somebody. Yep,
Yeah.
sure did.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about your role with the SCCA. How long have you been in your current position?
Oh gosh, current job title I think is like 3 years, but working with the SCCA as a full-time employee, I'm in my 10th year for the national office.
That's great. And so the last 3 years, you've been focused on finding ways to get more folks exposed to our sport and
Yep.
engaged in our sport. So tell the listeners a little bit more about that.
So I got brought in with SCCA. I've been running my own track day program. Hayward Wagner reached out to me and said, "Hey, I need somebody that understands the SCCA world and understands track day world." And me and Hayward and Jenny McAbee and Tom O'Gorman and a few of the folks, we basically were the launch team for Track Night in America. And so as part of that team, SCCA went from like 1,500 track day entries a year to I think 13,000. And then we they said, "What do you want next?" And I said, "I want time trials." And so we kind of rebuilt the time trials program, and we went from 400 time trials entries a year to like 4,000 time trials entries a year. And then the folks in road racing said, "Okay, our turn." And so that's where the current job is like how do we introduce some of those track night and time trials goals and techniques into the road racing program. And when you ask me like how do I do that, and the first thing I say is budget, right? Access is tough in road racing. Track days, track night, time trials. I can take my Miata and I can drive to one of those events and I can do it. In road racing, all of a sudden, the Miata needs the cage and the seat and the belts and now I need a trailer and a truck. So everything just ramps up exponentially when it comes to going wheel to wheel racing versus a streetcar based program. And so what we've done in the last few years is we were trying to do an endurance program called Team Enduro. We had this program being used a little bit, but sitting on the shelf called Club Race Experience. And once we really looked at it, we went, okay, it needs to go together. The reason why so many of these endurance programs are so popular is not necessarily because it's an endurance race. It's not in spite of the fact that there's no real championship endurance race. It's because those programs and those series out there have absolutely lowered the barriers to access as much as possible so that you're not piling things on top of the car, the truck, the trailer. And so we massaged and redid what we're now calling Race Experience, which has two formats to it: endurance experience and club race experience, which would be sprint races. And we're building that program and we're introducing it as the place to either casually race or start your racing journey in the SCCA. You know, other endurance racing programs that I'm sure your listeners are familiar with. If you go to those races and you say, "Hey, I want to be a little bit more serious," there's not really a place to go. The great thing about SCCA is if you come in and you're doing a race experience event and you say, "Hey, I think this needs to be a little more serious," we have our divisional level series. We've got the Hoosier Super Tour. We've got the U.S. Majors Tour. We've got the runoffs. And so we're in this position to have this spectrum of motorsports availability, of wheel to wheel racing ability. And so that's where I am. My day job is to help regions have these events so that more people can get more easily introduced to road racing through the SCCA.
Yeah, I've done two team enduros, and I've done 2 race experiences, and I just Ironmanned a 2-hour in my RX-7. It was like 300 degrees inside there, rotary stuff. But I got to tell you, fun weekend, easy to register. I just wish more people knew about it, because who wouldn't want to do a 3-hour enduro or a 2-hour enduro, get a couple buddies together. If you got the car, get to the track, have some fun.
Yeah, it's New England region just did their first of the endurance experience events, and I think they had 21 or 22 entries, which is not huge, but it was a 2-hour enduro. They actually did a 10-minute halftime, so they just took pit stops out of the equation, didn't have to worry about going in and out. And so a lot of the folks did, like, okay, we're gonna have one driver for an hour and another driver for an hour. And their members and their participants up there, like, you're gonna do it again next year, right? Can we do more next year? And we more people need to know about it, but also in the my fight is we need to have more events. Because I will get an email. A few weeks ago, I got an email like somebody going, "Hey, I saw this race experience program. I really want to do one. Where are you?" "Oh, I'm in San Diego." "Okay, well, the closest one to him is once a year. It's 8 hours away." So the in a chicken or egg sense, the more events we have, the more we'll get this momentum of participation, where when somebody says, "Hey, I want to go do one of those," there'll be one for them to do. And the SCCA is a national club, but it is more a um, confederation of independent sports car clubs, and so it takes a while to move that, to change the directions on that armada.
Right. And if someone wants to learn more, they can just go to scca.com, click on programs, and I believe there's a separate
Yeah,
race experience.
at scca.com/racex does it as well. So
Okay.
we got a little short link, and we're working on a new site for the SCCA. So hopefully that'll do better. We have so many programs. It's very easy for a racing organization with one program to have a very easily navigatable site. When you're the SCCA and you have somewhere between 7 and 10 programs, depending on how you count, flagging and communications and some of the trackside stuff. It's always 3 clicks to get down into wherever
Yeah.
you start to want to be. So, yeah.
All right. So let's say there's a young person out there and they heard your story and they don't want to hop a fence to meet AJ Foyt, and their dad can't get credentials into events to take pictures. What advice would you want to give someone that wants to get started in motorsports?
Oh man, you want my tongue-in-cheek advice or like my serious advice? Um,
Both.
the tongue-in-cheek, which is not really tongue-in-cheek, is study hard and get a good job so that when you're ready, you have the budget to go do it. And I mean, that sounds really weird. I will sometimes joke that instead of a Formula Ford, I should have bought a pitching machine and just looked at baseballs all day. But you know, to go racing, but if you want to go racing, and it doesn't matter if you're 16 or it doesn't matter if you're 67, um, you want to do what it takes to make it happen. Had a race experience in St. Louis earlier this year. We had a driver that drove into the track in his Chevy Sonic, and to participate in this race experience. Now he comes in full cage, race seat, window net, like everything he needs, and he has driven this car into the track. And we're very used to people pulling into like autocrosses and then changing the tires. But this guy took his license plates off the car and then drove it on the grid.
I love
And
that.
and I was asking him about it, and his dad was there, much like my dad was there, and he's like, "No, I built this in the driveway. This is everything I've made, everything I've owned is here." And I'm not I'm not condoning, I'm not condoning put your life savings and mortgage the house into a race car, but whatever you can afford, figure out the best way to go do it, and then do it. And look, if that's man, I can autocross locally in the car that I drive to work, that's autocrossing locally in the car you drive to work. And if it's taking your daily driver and putting a roll cage in it and going doing race experience, then it's that. But the biggest thing is not I think I said earlier, don't say no, ask how. The biggest
Hmm.
thing is to just say, how can I do this? On what level can I do this? And then going and executing on to the best of whatever your resources have to be able to experience what you want to experience.
Oh man. Well, we're just about finished up here. And before we get to the final question, is there something you wanted to talk about that we didn't hit on yet?
Oh man, that's a dangerous question to ask me, as anybody will tell you, because we could do 12 hours worth of this, and I probably still wouldn't be done. So there's nothing on the forefront of that other than to reiterate what I just said, which is if you're out there and you're listening and you're wondering, if ask how, because there's a way to be involved somehow.
Yeah, there is. And I have a previous guest, Sarin Kadapoli, and I quote him all the time. You have to find your joy in motorsports. It might be behind the wheel. It might be what I call trackside. Those are flaggers and communication, volunteering, could be crewing, could be driving someone's truck and trailer to the event for them, whatever, or even on the business side of things, whatever you can do to find that joy, go find it.
That's a super quote. And there have been moments where even I've been in race cars and asked myself, am I having fun out here? Like there's a lot of effort. There's a lot of risk. Um, what's going on? And I tell people that when they go, like, man, you drove pro and you got to do that. And I'm like, look, in the car on the day, the only difference is the autographs, and those are not necessary.
Hmm.
If you can find the place at the racetrack where you have that satisfactory breath at the end of the day where you go, man, that was cool, right?
Yeah.
That's really what you're chasing. And you can get that anywhere. You can get it at a local autocross, you can get it at a local, indoor karting place. Um, if anything, it's harder to get at some place like the 24 Hours of Daytona where you're doing a job.
Yeah. Well, it's time for the final question, John. You've been behind the wheel so many times. I'm sure you're going to have to say yes to this, but maybe not. Have you ever been late to grid?
Oh, yeah, no, I've been like the grid, sometimes strategically, but yeah, yeah.
Is there an instance where there's a funny story you can share?
I went late to grid and started last in a race because we decided. I looked at the track and I went, track's dry enough. Let's put the slicks on. And so I think I ended up starting like 43rd and then drove to the front and then promptly got dinged for being over sound. But we'll just talk about the first.
Oh,
We'll just talk about the first part of that where I was late to grid strategically and it paid off.
nice. So strategically, because you had to make the tire change, or you wanted to be behind all the cars to dry the track as well?
Because we needed to make the tire change.
Gotcha.
It's like I'm like, well, you're going to be late, and I'm like, I'd rather be on the right tire and be late than be on the
Hmm.
wrong tire and be where we qualified. So
Well, that's awesome. Good call for sure. Good
it
reason to
was
be
it was
late.
a great call. The steel wool we used to try to make the car quieter instead of just putting a real muffler on it was not a great call. So
Uh, well, John, it's been great having you on the podcast to hear your motorsports journey. You shared so much great stuff. I'm sure the listener is going to be better for listening. Thanks again.
excellent. Thank you for having me. Um, Truly awesome just to be able to share and to talk racing and to meet new folks, whether it's virtually or not, and share these motorsports experiences.